Morning, everybody. Welcome to our fourth cataloging um, events, cataloging three-dimensional materials in RDA Mark 21. Again, my name is David Shea. I am the head of cataloging for the Urban Department for Rare Books and Special Collections at the University of South Carolina, and we catalog a little bit of everything, um, all sorts of stuff. Ooh, can't hear anything. See. Can I get a message in? Or can anyone hear me right
Yeah,
now?
I'm hearing everything fine.
Okay.
So maybe that person's audio is having a problem.
Okay. Okay. All right. Well, we'll see what we can do. And again, this session's being recorded, so we can go back. Okay. Looks like most folks can hear me. All right. Just a quick note about me. And then some resources. Number one right here is OLAC, Online Audiovisual Catalogers Incorporated. They just released at the start of this year their best practices list for cataloging 3D objects. It is a really, really great resource. It has a lot of examples, a lot of different kinds of examples. Um, and it's pretty readable. So I would absolutely recommend that is something folks need to look at. We can look at. I've got it actually pulled up on my computer, so we can look at it a little bit after we go through some things. And then, of course, bib formats and standard OCLC bib formats and standards, and Library of Congress Mark 21, the RDA registry. And Library of Congress, some of their pages on subject headings. So let's just take a look at a couple things that I've pulled up some records for. Here we have a three-dimensional printer. So in OCLC Connection, the work form that you're starting from for most 3D objects is the visual materials work form, which is largely set up just like most other ones, but there's a few extra things. You see the type is very different. Some various other different things. So here we've got our 245 with the name of the printer. We have a 264 with the first indicator 3. Actually, I'm sorry, I just noticed that should not be there at all. That should be a blank. I don't know why that was there, but anyway, second indicator is 0 for for production. So this is most published materials would use a 1 for publication information. This is a production information. So where it was produced. We have a 300 field describing the printer, its dimensions and weight, and then the accessories that come with it. The 3x fields. We have some 538 fields for system information describing what kind of software and technical requirements it has. A summary, in quotations, noted that it's from the website, and some 500 fields noting other required technical information about it, and then our 6 various subject fields and other fields. Next up, we have over the course of 2 slides, a copy of a board game, Scythe, created by this gentleman right here. I pulled this one because I have a copy of it in my house. So we have some standard numbers. This one we have a 100 author main entry for the primary designer. We have our 245. We have our 264 that looks more or less just like a regular book. And then we have this mammoth 300 field. We have one game, and then in parentheses, all of the various boards, tokens, cards, miniatures listed all out in the subfield A, closing parentheses. We have a subfield B that lists the different kinds of things it's made out of. And then in our subfield C, we have in box with the size, the description of the box. We have our three X's. We have our 340 field. We have a 340 field, so this is telling us what this object is made out of. And then our next page, we have a 380 form of work. It's a board game with various notes about where the title and statement of responsibility came from, and then other things about it that may be useful, number of players, duration of play, other materials, summary, an age recommendation, and we'll get into the nuts and bolts of this. So in our fixed fields, our type here is R for realia. We use this for games, devices, models, statues, any kind of three-dimensional object. So in your fixed fields, someone was mentioning earlier, we have a piece of wood from a building. Our type is R. And again, in OCLC Connection, we're using the visual materials template. I can't make a statement to any other cataloging system, but usually three-dimensional objects are considered a sort of a subset under visual materials. So for something like a board game, I would definitely recommend filling in an audience field with whatever wide range of things that you could have, whatever kind of wide range of ages you might have for your game. Kind of the other big changes in your fixed field 3 is this TMAT right here, material type. So R is in your 008 byte number 33. R should be used for naturally occurring objects and man-made objects that don't fit into other classifications. So your chunk of wood from your building goes into R. Devices, machines, statues, pots, things people have made, as well as naturally occurring objects like fossils and minerals. A little typo right there. And then we have G for board games. W would be for toys. So if you want to catalog, your toys you might have in your kids section, material type would be W. Title and statement of responsibility 245. Containers are considered acceptable sources for titles and statements of responsibility. Just make sure you record that because you're not getting it off of, say, a title. Since you're still not technically getting it from a title page, you do want to record in a 500 note where that came from. And you're also going to want to enter a 500 note if you have to create the title, and maybe something explaining about how you created that title. So for your piece of wood from a building, you'll want to enter, in your 245, what it is, and I would try to be concise. So I don't know how I would say this. So at work, I have a pair of bookends made from bricks from Ray Bradbury's childhood home. I would say something like in my 245, bookends made of bricks from Ray Bradbury's childhood home. And that would really be sufficient for my title. And then I would record in a 500 note title by cataloger. And then I might add some sort of additional note describing a little bit more about that. Your 264 production, publication, manufacture, distribution, you just record this just like you would any other kind of published material if you have a published material. For naturally occurring objects, or your wood from a building, you'll want to enter the second indicator as a 0, and you're probably only going to, for production, and you're only going to want to have a subfield C. Likely with a range of years or your best guess for when it was created, and clarifying with a 500 note if you have if you have like a natural object that was collected at a certain time, you would want to have that in square brackets with a 500 note clarifying, oh, this was collected by, if you know who it was collected by so and so at this location at a date. So for your piece of wood from Hartwell Lake, you might want to say you just have a 264, second indicator 0, subfield C, then in square brackets, maybe something like 19th century. If it seems likely that that's from that, and then you'd have your 500 note collected between such and such a dates from Hartwell Lake, something like that. 300 physical description. This is kind of really where you have your opportunity to really describe what this object is. So inner subfield A will want to describe the number of things making up the object with subunits in parentheses. So here I've got one printer. This is one 3D printer. Below it, I have the example from Scythe, the board game. So I have one game, and then in parentheses, global components, and then 2 rules books, quick reference guide, 5 dual layer mats, 1 game board, etc., etc. And then in your subfield B, record materials and colors. So for the board game, I have cardboard. It's cardboard, paper, wood, plastic, and it's color. The 3D printer is a piece of equipment, so yeah, it doesn't really have like that. So my brick bookends, I would say 2 bookend in a 300. My subfield A, I would say 2 bookends, and then in my subfield B, I would say brick. And in subfield C, I would have the measurements of those. Or in this case, for the board game, I have in box and then a measurement of the box. Yeah, for things like board games, you can record the dimensions of the carrier or any other kind of container. So additionally, we have a subfield E, a plus sign subfield E, with all of the related materials that are not really considered integral to the object. Now, I think there would be a case for my dog's freaking out because my wife came home. Hold on just a second. Just let me know. Sorry about that. So I think you could make an argument here in this 300 field that this subfield E is might actually be in parentheses with the printer. But you could also, I think it is also just fine the way it is. Our 3-3x fields, 3-dimensional form, unmediated. Here in our 338, we have object for the printer. So equipment, my brick bookends, the piece of wood from Hartwell Lake. These would be objects with NR. And then for board games and kits and other things like that, you would put other. 336 and 338 are repeatable, and the RDA registry does have, and as well as bit formats and standards and OCLC Mark 21 cataloging has a breakdown of has good breakdowns for all of the different possible entries into these. 340 physical medium. So this is, there's no indicators, and you're using this to describe what something is made out of or some kind of technical specifications related to it. You're going to use this a lot for art. So if you have an art object, you can say canvas, subfield A, acrylic for an acrylic painting, or acrylic paints on canvas. Some of this is RDA controlled terminology, some of it is not. Again, you would check the RDA registry for that. 380 form of work, no indicators. This is used to differentiate different works. So a book versus a movie is one example. So if I had John le Carre's Tinker, Tailor, Soldier, Spy, there's the book, there's a TV version, and there's a movie. I can use a 380 to differentiate the two. I can also have a subfield 2 and identify a thesaurus to add a genre. This case I have board games, subfield 2, Library of Congress subject heading. So there's also a Library of Congress genre form term for board games as well, or possibly some other materials that you might have. Any questions so far? Okay. So your 5XX notes, this is really where you have the opportunity to really, really describe and add detail for what it is you have in hand. Um, so you have, in your 500 notes, you can have a number of players, a play time. You can add additional statements of responsibility or attribution, assuming there's no other play. So if you're my bricks from Ray Bradbury's home, I could have a 500 note explaining who made them. You could, from your piece of wood from Hartfield Lake, you could have a 500 note describing, you know, how it came to how you came to it, how it came to you, or who harvested it. You can make additional notes on production. You can further clarify contents of an object, either in individual 500 notes or a single 520 note. So if you wanted to provide some additional detail about the things in your 300 note, you can add individual 500 notes for each object or each component, or you can have a single 520 note explaining all of them in more detail. Let's see, is there a controlled vocabulary that you know of that would cover genre info for board games like worker placement, social deduction, etc., or would go in a 500 note? I do not know necessarily about a controlled vocabulary for that right now. There are. I feel like I must have at some point. Let me think about that, and I can find something about that. There is a really good ALCTSE webinar that's on YouTube about three-dimensional objects, which I'll mention that. So if you go to YouTube and search ALCTSE, in their videos page, there's a really good webinar about three-dimensional objects, which I would highly recommend. It's really good. They cover a lot of this stuff in some really great detail. So ALCTS. And they break down a lot about using faceting for some of your for board games and things like that, and it's a really neat presentation. Let's see, other requirements. Yeah, any other kind of requirements that you might have. So if we went back to the example about the 3D printer, there were 500 notes about what kind of filaments the 3D printer would accept. A 507 scale note for things like models and dioramas. Your 521, just like you would use a 521 to rate for ratings for movies, you can have this for, say, board games. You have 521, first indicator 1, second indicator 0, ages 10 and up. You've got your first indicator for age or interest age level. And then 586 award notes, always useful if you have something that's gotten an award. 538 system details notes. There are no indicators. This is a plain text field for technical information about your item. What kind of software or hardware item does your support? What kind of additional supplies and materials do you need to operate it? So, for example, requires SD storage card, compatible with Mac and PC, compatible with these softwares. Any kind of technical or hardware or software, equipment or information that you're going to need to operate your device. 588 source description note. So this is an OLAC best practice recommendation to use a 588 field if a title has to be assigned from a catalog or determined from an outside source. So you can technically do this in a 500 note, and I feel like this is probably what a lot of us are used to doing for this sort of thing. But OLAC recommends as a best practice to use a 588. I think that is something for you to determine for yourselves. I feel like 588s are really for serials, but again, it's a possible best practice that you could include in your cataloging. 7xx added authors. Just make sure to include your 7xx for people involved in making a resource. So this is the one from Scythe, the board game. You want to find your subfield E indicator, your subfield E relator terms, and apply them as well as you can. Some of them may not necessarily be relevant or may not exactly fit. These are not a fixed set of vocabulary per se. At Hollings, at the Rare Books department, we have a large comic book and graphic novel collection, so we use we've decided that we're going to use as a relator term inker and letterer, which are terms that show up in comic books a lot. You can create your own relator terms as that you feel are needed, but the best policy is to decide as an institution what additional relator terms you feel are needed for your collection, and be consistent and try to, I guess, one of my coworkers likes to use the phrase mission creep. Just that, advise not to try and get too deep into detail that may or may not serve you, that may just serve to confuse the issue. And here I've thrown in a 586 field because the printer has one, a 586 field for linking to outside resources. And so I've got our first indicator 4 for a website, and there's quite a few different options. There's a few different options for your first indicator. This one I've got because it's linking to a manual related to this 3D printer. You've got your subfield U for your URL for the resource, and your subfield Z for the description of the link. So you can link out to manuals for equipments or games. A lot of board game companies now, especially for more complex games, will have links in their manuals will have links to their YouTube page and have videos about how to play their game or guides on how to play their game. These are things for things like board games or equipment you could consider having in your catalog record. So that your patrons can go in and look out to things, so they could look at, say, a video, your catalog record for a board game, say, oh, this looks interesting, but then I can link to the company's YouTube page and see how you actually play it and see if this is actually something I'm interested in. And that basically sums up all of the notes that I had down. Is there any questions anyone has? Anything they want to look at? We can look at some of the examples here in the OLAC best practices guide, which I think is really great. Let me find them. Sorry if if scrolling through things is a little odd. So here's an example of a handmade item. So we have title from text on the banner in this 588. We have a 500 date of production estimated from the activity of the organization. Over 300. And we have a 520 note describing in greater detail about what the item is. There's some photos of it. And here we have an example where they're using two separate 300 fields to describe two different aspects of the item, so a teacup and a saucer. We have a 380 tableware, Library of Congress subject headings. So yeah, is there any other questions or anything people are interested about or curious about? Two terms. I can. I think I've made a few modifications. So what I'll do is, I think I might have accidentally sent out an earlier version of the presentation. So what I'll do is I will add in this on the resources page. I'll add the RDA relator terms. The RDA registry has a lot of links to specific terminology. So let's just take a look at the RDA registry page real quick. So this right here, RDA values, we've got a lot of different kinds of RDA terminology relating to different kinds of characteristics. These are controlled ones. So let's look at, try to think of some of them I might want to use. Forms of tactile notation, Braille, etc. So it's a question, if you were to put an item in something to help preserve it, i.e. a shadow box, for example, would you put that information into the record? I wouldn't necessarily. So, for example, we put lots of things in phase boxes, and other kinds of acid-free boxes at the rare books department, but we don't actually include that information into our catalog records. Although we do have, it's sort of implied in our location information. So we have a section just for our boxes, but I think it comes down to, is it going to be helpful for you to find it, or helpful to your patrons to find it? We do use a lot of 590 local fields to describe individual aspects about our items that is specific to our item, specific to our copies. So for example, if we have a lot of items that are signed by their authors, and a lot of cover variants and that sort of things, and we use a 590 field for local notes to describe information about specific copies. But if we were to, but we don't necessarily have in the catalog record if it's in, if we place it in a specific box. We usually only include information about boxes if it's integral to the item itself. Yeah, no, so Michaela Weisner says we put all our book club kits in a container and note all that in a 500 note field. I think, yeah, that is a perfectly reasonable thing to do. Um, all right. Well, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen now. Thanks so much, everybody. I really appreciate you guys letting me come out and talk to you guys about cataloging. Um, and